You're watching India at G20. On the show today, we focus on two meetings, the third Culture Working Group meeting in Hampi in Karnataka and the third Trade and Investment meeting in Kevadia in Gujarat. While the Culture meeting focuses on building consensus on recommendations and best practices pertaining to 4 Indian priorities, the Trade and Investment meeting is focused on resilient trade and global value chains, integrating MSMEs in world trade, logistics for trade and WTO reforms. On the show today, we will get you updates on both the meetings and analyze progress made under the culture track of India's G20 presidency so far. I'm Manun Paracharya. First up, the top stories. Union Minister of India Prahlad Joshi shares welcome remarks at the inaugural session of the third Culture Working Group meeting in Hampi in Karnataka. The meeting aims to achieve consensus on the recommendations and best practices on the 4 priorities of the Culture Working Group. Culture Working Group enters the Guinness Book of World Records by creating the largest display of Lumbini embroidery patches in Hampi. The third Trade and Investment Working Group meeting of G20 kicks off in Kevadia in Gujarat with a seminar on trade infrastructure. Meeting aims to build consensus on accomplishing action-oriented proposals by the Indian presidency. The third G20 Culture Working Group meeting under India's G20 presidency is taking place in Hampi, an ancient city in Karnataka. The meeting aims to build consensus on recommendations and best practices pertaining to the 4 priorities under the culture track and evolve a joint statement for the culture ministerial meeting in August in Varanasi. Here's a report on the inaugural session of the meeting today.
Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Coal and Mines in the Government of India, Prahlad Joshi, who represents Dharwad and Karnataka in the Lok Sabha, addressed the inaugural session of the third Culture Working Group meeting in Hampi, an ancient city in the southern Indian state of Karnataka. He spoke on how the spotlight in the third meeting is on building consensus on the 4 priority areas identified by India's G20 presidency. The Union Minister elaborated on the relevance of Hampi as the host city of the meeting.
As a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Hampi's renowned archaeological ruins and the remains of ancient structure offer a vivid peek into the India's vibrant past. Here in the middle of Hampi's ancient culture, we are connected not just to India's past, but to the shared past of the humanity.
The Union Minister elaborated on the relevance of Hampi as the host city for the meeting.
Today we are not just attendees at meeting, we are active participants in the global cultural shift. Today we strive to build a consensus on the ministerial declaration containing the 4 priority areas, which are cornerstones in our vision of an inclusive and sustainable future. Each of these priorities showcases a world that is culturally diverse yet unified, a world where the cultural heritage is both a pillar of the past and pathway to the future.
The Union Minister concluded his remarks with a futuristic vision around culture.
Let our work today pave the way for the future, where the culture is not just part of our identity, but a driving force for sustainable development, social inclusion, and global harmony.
The Culture Working Group is working with delegates of the G20 members, guest nations and international organizations through an inclusive process of in-depth discussions. These deliberations aimed to reaffirm critical areas for collaboration action and to further develop tangible recommendations and best practices for sustainable development. With Bureau Input's Aisha Khanam's report from Hampi for DD India.
The Culture Working Group entered the Guinness Book of World Records by creating the largest display of Lumbini embroidery patches in Hampi. DD India correspondent Aisha Khanam reports from Hampi.
Now, this G20 platform will provide a cross-section of deliberations and will also talk about how culture is a medium for sustainable development, and also prioritize the preservation of monuments, preservation of the ethnicity of the local tribe. This is the agenda of all the countries under G20 coming together. And also the important aspect is digital technology, the use of digital technology and the medium of digital technology to preserve culture, to promote culture, and the exchange of ideas between the G20 countries to preserve culture is one of the other aspects of G20 meet here at Hampi. And also this place being a heritage site, all the delegates will be visiting all the important monumental sites, wherein they will be treated to a spectacular sound and light show at Vitala complex, which will narrate the past era, past glory of Hampi through sound and lights. And this is a spectacular moment the delegates are waiting to witness. And also a world record created here at Hampi, wherein a large number of Lambanis have created the beautiful creative patchwork designs which they are known for. So this is a Guinness record, and also encourage the Lambanis to preserve their own culture. So the G20 meet at Hampi is going to set the tone for the fourth culture working group meeting, which will take place at Varanasi, and besides the two meetings that happened at Khajuraho and Bhubaneswar, all the deliberations will come towards a common resolution that these countries will be taking forward for the G20 summit in September. And the countries resolve to stand by this medium of culture, which they say Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and also culture unites all. With cameraman Vasuki, Asha Khanam, DD India, Hampi.
Joining us for perspective on the third Culture Working Group meeting is Suresh Kumar Goyal, former Director General of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations on ICCR and former Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Such a pleasure to have you, Mr. Goyal, on News Night. We are aware that in Hampi as well, there is an effort that is going on to build consensus on the four priorities, the recommendations around them, the best practices, etc., and take it forward to the ministerial in August in Varanasi. Let's come to the four priority areas one by one. The first is restitution and protection of cultural property. How significant is that for protecting cultural heritage? India wants all the G20 member nations to be signatory to the 1970 UNESCO Convention that enjoins upon all the signatories to return artifacts that were either stolen or taken through colonial plunder or smuggled from some other country into their country.
Very important. I would say that cultural property, the cultural heritage, is a common property of the world. It's a universal property, really. And therefore, it becomes the responsibility of each nation to protect it, preserve it, and promote it. And in that sense, it becomes very, very important that the property, cultural properties which have been plundered or which have been acquired illegally, I would say, without the due process of law, must be returned to the owner, and must be taken care of, must be preserved in the way it should be. So this is a very, very important area for the cultural group to take care of.
Of course, the second priority is harnessing living heritage for a sustainable future. How significant is culture in the context of sustainable development? We'll be playing later a conversation that the correspondent of DD India, Aisha Khanam, had with the UAE delegate, and she also emphasized how the two are very fundamentally intertwined, considering that UAE will also be hosting COP28 later. But how do you explain to the viewer the interlinkages that are there between culture and sustainable development?
I think if in our philosophy we talk about the soul force, that everybody and everything has a soul, I would call the principle of the priority area number 2 to be the actual soul of the entire exercise. After all, sustainable development and a sustainable future require a kind of resonance between individual or different cultural streams. They require the different cultural ideas and different cultural notions to come together to form one common theme for the entire humanity. When we talk about Vasudev Kutumbakam, that is the real essence of priority area number 2. Therefore, if we have to really succeed in promoting culture, primarily as a kind of an idea that brings people together, but also to really promote and develop them together. When G20, the idea was one world, one future, one family. This is it really. So I would say that priority area number 2 is the one of the most important priorities that we have decided on as a part of the cultural working group.
How do you look at India's emphasis on ensuring that if there is any sort of commercialization that takes place of the living heritage or of ancient cultural practices, the communities that have fostered those practices should stand to benefit commercially? That's India's thrust.
I will put it slightly differently if you allow me. Commercialization of the cultural properties is a very complex process. Commercial processes basically mean that whoever owns that cultural property should be able to get the benefit of that cultural property. At the same time, we say that culture is indivisible. Culture actually brings people together. So on the whole, we are bringing several contradictions together here, but the basic point is that culture is made up of people. People should benefit from it. And therefore the people who have been behind creation of any particular cultural idea or cultural entity, cultural idea, whether it is craft or whatever it is, should be able to benefit from it. Cultural industries should be nurtured to benefit people who create that cultural industry.
Right. Also, Mr. Goyal, there's also emphasis on creating mechanisms that try and understand that what kind of cultural footprints are being created at various cultural monuments and cultural places. Why is that important?
How does culture actually survive in the world? The culture can survive only when people are aware of where they belong and what they have inherited. And for people to know what they have and how it relates to them, they have to see that culture, they have to imbibe that culture, they have to live that culture. And that can happen only when they go there and they see it. After all, we talk about Mahabalipuram, we talk about Rameshwaram, we talk about the Colosseum in Rome. But talking is not enough. When you go there, you see how it happened and how it related to the people at that time. That's the only way to understand and promote culture. And therefore, not just talk, but be there.
And also the focus is on use of digital technologies to make culture more accessible to people around the world. How does the world of culture then tap into the interoperability that comes with various digital technologies such as augmented reality, virtual reality, etc.?
Those are technical instruments with which you actually take culture to the people. When people cannot come there after it's a busy world, so even though the preference really should be that people should be able to visit those cultural places, cultural ideas. But otherwise, to take culture to the people, these are useful ideas, useful technologies, digital technology. And therefore, I think very useful in terms of building that kind of synthesis or synergy between people and the cultural ideas.
Right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Goyal, for joining us with your thoughts on the 4 priorities of the Culture Working Group under India's G20 presidency, around which India is trying to create consensus going into the G20 summit on the 9th and 10th of September in New Delhi. Well, in a light-hearted yet meaningful conversation, Dr. Marisa Henderson, UNCTAD delegate, told DD India's Aisha Khanam in Hampi that she can feel culture in real time in Hampi and that culture is the meat for creative industry, which in turn is an engine of development. She also voiced UNCTAD's support for the diversity and development of every country in the global south. Take a listen.
I have with me Maria Henderson, who is from UNCTAD, and she is here at Hampi attending the G20 summit. Maria, welcome to Hampi.
Thank you so much.
So how do you, Hampi is the UNESCO World Heritage Site. So how do you see, the past of Hampi connecting the G20 countries culturally?
I think it's so important that we are here so we can live we can feel the culture, we can see what we are discussing in real time, and the importance of heritage, the importance of diversity, and the importance of creative economy for sustainable growth and development. And UNCTAD, which is the organization I work in, is here to support member states and guest nations and work with other international organizations to provide support and make culture work for all.
Right. And now we are also talking about diversity, which is a strong foundation for sustainable development. So how do you see G20 acting as a platform to bring this, to make this more concrete and sustainable?
Well, I think it's, you can see it. Each time you go to a new presidency, you actually see the diversity that we have. The Indonesia last year was super rich, and here is as much. But it's incredible the differences. And next year we'll see Brazil, which is a completely, I'm coming from Latin America, and you'll see it's a completely different dynamic, which shows how important is culture for all. Culture is the meat of the creative industries, for development.
Right. And also the fact that the G20 motto is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, world is one family.
Yes.
And India, believes in this as a cultural, it is a cultural roots in India. So how do you see India's hospitality and the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam motto, kind of unfolding here?
Well, we have, UNCTAD has a strong tradition with India. India is one of our members of the G77, and so for us, we work for you guys, and we support the diversity and the development that each country has of the global south. So we are here to support, and we're here to help you in any way we can.
How do you see the hospitality during this G20?
Oh, we're loving it. Of course. We're having so much fun, and I can see the delegates here. They are just so nice, and there is a very, very good sense of community, and I think the results of the meeting will be very meaningful.
Thank you very much for talking to us. Thank you. That was Maria talking to us, and she says that this platform will come out with meaningful discussions and deliberations on taking forward the cultural diversity and also the world community coming together for sustainable development through culture.
A cultural property agreement being negotiated between India and the US is set to enable US authorities to intercept smuggled goods and artifacts and return them expeditiously to India. Around 150 artifacts are expected to return from the US to India in the next 3 to 6 months. DD India correspondent Aisha Khanam spoke to USA delegate Eric Catalfamo in Hampi on that and more. Take a listen.
The G20 at Hampi is an interesting gathering of the G20 countries, wherein the countries are here with a common agenda for sustainable development and growth, uniting and also culture as a medium for this growth. Now, today's agenda after the inauguration, we have in Hampi several delegates visiting the sites at Hampi. But right now I have with me Eric Catalfamo, who is from USA, who is the delegation head from USA. And let's talk to him. Thank you for talking to Doordarshan, Eric. So Hampi is a town which has seen the golden era in India. It has a very rich past, glorious past. So how do you see, this past glorious era, the golden period, common elements across the G20 countries?
Well, it's wonderful to be here again, back in India for the G20 Culture Working Group, and I think it's important to consider culture as a connection to the past, but also as a bridge to the future. And that's part of what the discussions this week in Hampi will focus around. From the United States, we're really pleased to be working with our partners under India's leadership for the protection of cultural patrimony, cultural heritage, which is dear to all of our cultures. We all want to take care of what is ours and to treasure that and to share it with the world. And that's part of the goal for the working group this week.
And also the priorities, the four important areas that we are talking is about restitution, of the cultural property. And United States and India also has the common, culture agreement property, and under which 150 artifacts are likely to come back to India even after Prime Minister spoke to a US President.
That's true. We were honored to have the Honorable Prime Minister come to visit Washington just last month and spoke with President Biden about these issues and the protection of cultural patrimony. And as you say, the United States takes our laws very seriously about the enforcement of cultural property protection. And when it is the correct thing to do to make a return, our authorities do that. And we've made many returns to India, and we continue to take all of the requests very seriously.
Right. And we're also talking about leveraging digital technology, use of technology for preservation of culture, and also, to bind the G20 countries, sharing of knowledge through the digital medium. So how do you see this working as a strong medium to build a strong cultural relationship?
Well, during the pandemic, I think the whole world got a little bit of new experience in using digital connectivity to stay in touch and to learn and to explore things that we otherwise might not have the opportunity to do so. And so in the cultural sector, there's been a real boom of interest in using digital technology to make culture more accessible, but also more understandable. And that's part of the work of this working group, is to set goals for digitizing cultural collections, for having that sort of equality and equity of accessibility, so that culture, which belongs to all, can be enjoyed by all.
Right. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi is, taking the under his leadership, the culture and global motto Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So how does this Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam can be a binding force for attaining the sustainable development?
Well, each G20 presidency brings a little bit of their culture, their country's character to the table, and I've been so impressed by India's leadership this year in encouraging the theme of one Earth and one family, one future that we share together. That's certainly the kind of cooperation that we're looking for. As we sit around the table this week with 20 members and with invited guest countries. And so I think it's a great aspirational goal for us all to have, and certainly you can count on the United States to be supporting that in India's presidency.
What's your impression of Hampi? Because it's a World Heritage Site. UNESCO has said it's a must-see site. So have you seen videos? Have you been to the places here?
I was yesterday at the Place Hampi exhibit close to the airport, and so I've had a chance to see photographs. I've had a chance to see 3D models. When you speak about technology, there's a great example right here in Karnataka.
What are the common cultural aspects remind you of home when you go around India, when you interact with the delegates here?
That's an excellent question. I mean, there's so much connection between the United States and India these days. My best friend back home is Indian American, for example, and so I've been hearing about India for a very long time, and I think really the warmth of the people. We Americans, we consider ourselves to be approachable and hospitable, but perhaps the Indians have one leg up on us. So when it comes to hospitality, we've been received really warmly, and I just thank the entire G20 Secretariat for the warm welcome that we've received.
What's on your plate when you are in India?
On the physical plate, oh my goodness, we've had the most wonderful food, wonderful, we're trying the filter coffee down here in South India, for example. No, it's just a kaleidoscope of culture and flavors and experiences, and really a great privilege to be here.
Thank you so much for talking to Doordarshan. That was Eric talking to us about the G20 summit here and how the culture is binding, the countries together, and US and India enjoy a strong mutual relationship through culture, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been leading this from all the fronts, and this is what the essence of G20 is all about. With cameraman Vasuki, Aisha Khanam, DD India, Hampi.
French delegate Francois Parain shared his fondness and respect for Lord Ganesh in an interaction with DD India correspondent Aisha Khanam.
Very happy to be in Hampi. I'm looking forward to visiting the heritage site. Especially, I'm very fond of Ganesh deity. So I've heard that there was a big Ganesh statue, a wonderful Ganesh statue. So I'm longing for worshipping this statue of Ganesh.
Francois also said that the G20 presidency gave him the opportunity to read the ancient Indian epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata.
Presidency was for me the opportunity to read a lot about India, about India's culture. For instance, I read the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and this was an incredible pleasure for me to discover those epics, which I love very much.
Shifting gears to Kevadia in Gujarat, famous for the world's tallest statue, the Statue of Unity. There, the G20 delegates were given a grand and traditional welcome as they arrived at the Vadodara airport for the third G20 Trade and Investment Working Group meeting. The delegates took part in a side event on trade infrastructure, which initiated discussions on issues related to the role of logistics in expanding global value chains and MSMEs getting a global footprint. And here are some glimpses of the three-day exhibition on PM Gati Shakti, showcasing the success stories of adopting the PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan at the third G20 Trade and Investment Working Group meeting in Kevadia. And with that, we come to the close of this edition of India at G20. Hope you liked the show. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.